So I miss Mondstadt. It's been almost 5 years since the release of Genshin and me coming across Mondstadt for the first time, and I have to say I kind of miss that feeling. I think with all of the new content and new regions that's come out over the years, going back to Mondstadt still feels a lot like home. Like recently we just had the interlude quest with Albedo, and if you don't know, I love Albedo. He's one of my favorite characters. So going back to Mondstadt, I was so excited. Like I was so hyped. And other than the Albedo lore, I also just miss seeing Mondstadt characters in action. You know that feeling like the year is 2020, we can't go outside unfortunately, but Genshin released and many of us started our journey in Tevat. Everything is new, we bump into Venti and Valen, and then we meet Amber and then the rest of the Knights of Favonius. And in this video, I'm going to be looking back a bit. This is going to be a bit different than my usual videos. It's unscripted, so I'm basically just going off of memory here, so forgive me if I get things wrong, but I just wanted to do a chill video and reminisce with you guys. Now, the main thing that I miss about Mondstadt the most is the cast of characters that just feel like friends. I get that they are the starter characters, so we've known them the longest, and I'm not saying that the other cast of the other regions are bad. It's just, for me personally, there's just something so special about Venti, Jean, Diluc, Kaeya, Lisa, and all of the other Mondstadt characters. I often wonder why I feel that way, but I think it goes back to the first Archon quest, you know, the one with the Valen. I think the Mondstadt Archon quest is so simple, yet it gave so much room for the main ensemble to shine. Like, who were the characters at the time? It was Diluc, Jean, Venti, Paimon, and the Traveler. They were like the main ones who went to save the Valen from agony and corruption. And during that quest, I remember specifically being so intrigued by the different dynamics that these Mondstadt characters have with each other. Like, for example, we have Venti, who's obviously the Archon, but no one actually knows who he is, and he acts like a drunk and very whimsical. Like, we even have that scene where he tries to beg a nun to give him the holy lyre, and then he's like, I'm Barbados, you have to give me the lyre. And she's like, what are you talking about? No, get out. I've always found that scene really funny because it just builds on Venti as a character. It highlights him, like who he is. Like, he is the Archon, he's telling the truth, but because he's so absent and he's so unserious, like this nun has absolutely no reason to trust him or what he's saying, even though they have a statue of him like in the middle of a city, which is kind of funny if you think about it. And then his interactions with Barbara and also Jean. I really like how Jean subtly knows like who he is, but she doesn't really say anything up until the end. Diluc also is Diluc. Like, I really like how he was the Batman of Mondstadt at one point. I love like he left his position in the Knights of Favonius but still continued to protect Mondstadt by night, and by day he just runs a winery. And I cannot forget that one scene in the tavern where Jean and Diluc have this really awkward moment. It was like one line of dialogue, I think, and it wasn't even really that important, but it was enough for me to have the impression of like, oh, there's something here, there's history here, there's something that's making them awkward. And that in itself is already an interesting dynamic. And then we later learn that Diluc used to be the cavalry captain, you know, before Kaeya, even though there are no horses still in Genshin. But anyway, so Jean used to be his subordinate and they used to work together, and then Diluc left for personal reasons, and now they're like super awkward for some reason. And Jean is of course the acting grandmaster of the Knights of Favonius, and we learn that the actual grandmaster is off somewhere, Varka, and it's interesting that 5 years after that quest, we have still yet to meet him, but I think we will meet him soon. We should meet him soon. And we also learn that Barbara and Jean are sisters. I don't specifically remember if it's mentioned in the quest, but if you dig around the lore, they are sisters, but they have estranged parents and they grew up separately in separate households, but they do still care for each other a lot. And then of course there's Diluc and Kaeya, who aren't related, but they did grow up together, and then went down between them and they're not really on good terms. That's why we had that scene where Diluc saved Kaeya and then they had this like banter. It was a very impressionable scene for a lot of people, I'm sure. Now Kaeya obviously is also really interesting on his own, even like to this day. He's the heir of the Alberic family from Condria, his Condrian descent. His ancestor founded the Abyss Order, you know, Clothar, that's related to to Kaeya. And I love that we have such an important character so early on, and he's like the free character that we get, which is, I don't know, is that nice or is that a crime? But anyway, he grew up with Diluc. They used to be very close. Diluc's dad took Kaeya in when he was a child, and he was left there because he's the last hope of Khandria, I guess. But when Kaeya revealed the truth to Diluc, it just kind of put a strain on their relationship, so it's a bit awkward now also. Like, everyone's just awkward with each other in Mondstadt, and I kind of low-key live for it. I think just by that premise, you can already tell, like, Kaeya battles with loyalty and identity and has a complicated relationship not only with Diluc and Mondstadt, but also with himself. That he's someone who grew up in Mondstadt with people from Mondstadt. He's never been to Khandria, he doesn't know anyone who's Khandrian, and I think it's a good story to tell, like, how someone can struggle with identity based on where they grew up and for having like different roots. And we do get to see Kaeya trying to connect with his roots pretty later on. I think it was Caribert in Sumeru. He was there to connect with Khandria. He hasn't abandoned that side of him, but he's also very much loyal to Mondstadt, at least right now. That in itself is already such a layered character. You can ask so many questions, like if it comes to defending Mondstadt and Khandria, which one do you think Kaeya will choose? I personally think he will stand with Mondstadt because his found family is there. I think that's also like the big theme of Mondstadt. It's built with found family dynamics. And then of course there's Diluc. Diluc struggles with grief and anger and regret after losing his father to a delusion accident. This is the foundation of his hatred towards the Fatui because, you know, the Fatui are responsible for the delusion. So when the Knights of Favonius failed to enact justice, Diluc stepped down from his role and he actually went on a journey. I think it was in his character story where he tried to hunt down the Fatui. He hunted them down for quite a while. I think it was 3 years, 4 years. And then he almost died, and then he retreated back and took over the family business while also joining an intelligence network, I believe. I could be wrong. And then he just became the guardian of Mondstadt, which is very cool of him. And then we have Lisa, who's very playful, but she's also one of the smartest mages across the land in Teyvat. She's actually Sumeru Academia's most distinguished graduate in like 200 years. And then she returned to Mondstadt to take the humble job of librarian for the Knights of Favonius. You know, the more I talk about this, the more I realize that there's so many like lore setups from these characters from Mondstadt. Like Sumeru Academia, it's mentioned through Lisa, and then we have Khandria, which is Kaeya, and then we have like the Fatui from Diluc, and then we have Mayor Jivari from Bennett. She's also Sino's classmate, by the way, which is a very neat detail that I always like, and I like that they interacted that one time, that Windbloom festival, I believe. And it's an interaction that you can actually miss. I remember being so mad at it because it's not a cutscene. And 2 patches in after that, we get Albedo. Albedo is a homunculus, and he's also related to Durin. This is also another big lore setup for the world of Teyvat. Durin is the dragon that attacked Mondstadt during the Cataclysm, and it's also why Venti woke up from his long slumber during the time to help the people of Mondstadt fend off Durin, and that's how Durin ended up in Dragonspine. Durin is also the reason why Signora, who was still Rosalind at the time, lost her lover, and then it snowballed into her becoming the Crimson Witch of Flames, and then Signora, the Signora we know and love, R.I.P. So a lot of the relevant story or lore that's still going on can be traced back to Mondstadt in some ways. I almost forgot Klee, and for a while Klee was the princess of summer events, and it was always just a good time when she's around. She's very funny, she's cute, and she also has this found family bond with Albedo. She actually appears in Albedo's trailer, launch trailer, I believe, and they also interacted a lot in the first Golden Apple Archipelago event. I remember there was a discourse about how she calls Albedo Mr. Albedo in the English dub. Meanwhile, in the other languages, like in Chinese and Japanese, she would refer to him as Big Brother Albedo. I never understood that decision, but anyway, they are also a part of the found family dynamic. The reason why they even have this found family dynamic is because Alice, Plea's mother, is friends with Gold, who is the creator of Albedo, which I'm sure most of you know by now. So Albedo also went to Mondstadt and Alice took him in and they became a little family. I don't know, maybe I'm just a sucker for found family dynamics. I think it's the sweetest. So going back to Alice, Alice is probably the most enigmatic and mysterious character that we know so far. Her and the Hexenzirkel. We've never seen one member of the Hexenzirkel, like their actual character model. We've interacted with a few, but never like in person. We've also interacted with Alice like several times throughout the years, but never like, again, in person. She's never actually there. But you know she has otherworldly powers. She's adventuring and writing this book, this guidebook to Teyvat, but she's also interacting with characters like Skirk, as we've learned in her story quest. The Hexenzirkel is one of the most mysterious groups in Genshin, like in the game right now, and it goes back to Mondstadt because it goes back to Alice. And not only Alice, actually. So we have Mona introduced in Mondstadt also, and she is very funny in the beginning because she is someone who seems to have no money to even pay for her own food. And you get those little commissions where she's unable to pay her rent. And for the longest time, we always thought that she was just broke, like astrology makes no money. But it turns out she just spends her money on astrology equipment. And I can understand her for that. She's not broke, she's just bad at financial decisions, I guess. But anyway, Mona's master is part of the Hexenzirkel. She's Barbeloth. And the Hexenzirkel has aided the traveler in their journey throughout Teyvat. And when talking about the characters, I really want to talk about how they set up Venti as an Archon. He is one of the oldest Archons. He's part of the original 7 alongside Zhongli, but he's also very whimsical and very like unserious. He's also very sussy. He's just the type of character that we know is hiding something and he's just not saying everything that he knows. He's withholding the truth. He's not lying, but he's withholding. And I think even to this day, we don't really know why he's withholding information. So for Zhongli, we know he's withholding information because he's binded by a contract. But for Venti, it's still up in the air. And I get a feeling that we are getting closer and closer to knowing why that is. And I'm excited to know. Venti is also, I think, the Archon that feels like a friend, like from the get-go. I'm not saying that we're not friends with the other Archons, but compared to Zhongli and later on A, he does feel like the most friend-like because he's just so silly. Other than the lore and everything that we've just discussed about these characters, I think the reason why they're so beloved, it's also because most of them are pretty layered. Like I said, Diluc has an entire story about him battling with grief and regret and anger. Like, man literally went on a venge quest after his father died. And Kaeya is someone who hides the truth from a lot of people. Like, not a lot of people know he's from Khaenri'ah, I believe. I could be wrong on that. Please correct me if I am. But him hiding the fact that he's from Khaenri'ah obviously hurt Diluc a lot, and that's why their relationship is so weird now. And Jean is someone who's just trying to survive her job and holding onto a post that she's not even supposed to be holding. It's supposed to be Varka, but she needs to step up so that Mondstadt doesn't just get destroyed. And Albedo is essentially also hiding the truth from everyone he knows in Mondstadt. And oh my god, I almost forgot Eula. Eula is also a character that's very different. She's not the nicest. She talks in a very different way than the other characters. And the reason she talks that way is because the people of Mondstadt already hates her because of her family and what her family did to Mondstadt centuries ago. But despite the horrific things that Eula's family did hundreds of years ago, she as an individual is trying her best to contribute to Mondstadt in a positive way. And she struggles with the condemnation of the people of Mondstadt because they view her as part of the Lawrence clan. But Eula herself isn't a bad person. She is trying to prove that she's not a bad person. She cares for people. She cares for Mondstadt and its safety. And that in concept is already such a great setup for a complex character. And Eula is a complicated character. I just feel like we don't really get to see her that much. So what I'm getting at here is like the characters in Mondstadt, they're very flawed. None of them are like this cookie cutter character who has no purpose or no like actual impact on the narrative. Like, they all have their own individual stories, like they have lives. It's very believable that the Mondstadt characters have lives. Like Venti, again, he's very friendly, he's very silly, but he's also very flawed. He is someone who doesn't manage Mondstadt directly, and that can be a good thing. Like, he gives freedom to his people, but he's also failed to show up for his people several times during very crucial moments, like when Durin attacked, he was late, hence why Signora lost her lover and she became Signora. So that is an example of him failing one of his people. I'm not saying that makes him a bad person, but it does show that there is some flaws to his approach of freedom. And we have Eula, like we just talked about. Like Diluc and Kaeya also have their own baggages, like as we've discussed earlier. But other than the flawed characters, the other characters like Amber, and let's not forget the 4-stars, like there's Fischl. Fischl obviously is one of the most developed 4-star characters in the game, I believe. One of, not the most, but one of. And these characters, other than having like complex and layers to them, they also just feel like normal people. Most of them aren't part of a faction, they're just people doing their own thing. And it's just very different from, let's say, the Resistance in Inazuma or the Heroes of Natlan. They are just random people living their own random lives in Mondstadt, and I think that's why it feels so simple and feels kind of like home, you know, it has that homey vibe. Speaking of simplicity, I think Mondstadt's Archon quest gets a lot of for being like so generic RPG, and Mondstadt itself being a generic RPG town, but I think there's charm and strength to it. For the Archon quest itself, the plot is pretty simple. There's a big dragon attacking a town. We need to help the people and taking down the dragon, and then we learn that the dragon is actually suffering from corruption, so we need to heal the dragon. It's so simple, it's so straightforward, and I think it works as an introductory quest, especially now looking back. The other regions have really intense Archon quests. Even in Liyue, it was about their Archon dying right in front of them and the mystery that comes with that. And of course, there's the intervention of the Fatui. There's Child there. I mean, Signora is also in the Mondstadt Archon quest, but she doesn't show up until the last 5 minutes of the quest, so it doesn't count. And then we have Inazuma, which is just a full-on civil war as a plot. And then in Sumeru, there's a conspiracy against the Archon, and the Archon herself is in prison. In Fontaine, it was a prophecy, and in Natlan, it was a war. Other than Mondstadt, the Traveler always feels like they're fighting something bigger than themselves. Like either it's an Archon ideology, a war, a prophecy. But in Mondstadt, it's helped the Bard, the Wine Man, and the Night Lady heal the dragon. And that's it. I think because the Archon quest was so simple, it just makes Mondstadt feel like a very safe place where you can return to, and that also adds to the homey feeling of it. But while Mondstadt is simple in its Archon quest, it's definitely not boring. Why? Because, like I said, all of the lore bits were set up in Mondstadt. Well, not all, but a lot of it were. When talking about Hexenzirkel, where do we go back? We go back to Mondstadt. When we talk about Gold and her creations, other than the Rift Hounds, we go back to Mondstadt because that's where Durin and Albedo is. And when talking about Istaroth, I automatically, like personally for me, I go back to Mondstadt because I think that's where it was referenced the first time. It wasn't in a quest, but it was in a side quest, world quest. So yeah, there you have it. I think that's why I miss Mondstadt so much from time to time, because I just miss feeling like going home, and going back to Mondstadt does feel like going home. I really hope that Genshin can do a similar approach in building up characters the same way they did in Mondstadt. It was so simple, yet it was able to show the bond between characters very effectively. And I think that's what's missing from Natlan. Personally, I think that's what they lacked. The Natlan characters are cool and they're likable, but I feel like they lacked that heart that Mondstadt have. I'm not saying that makes them automatically bad. If you like them, you like them. But we had 6 heroes for Natlan, but none of them feel like they even know each other that well, or even know each other at all. They feel like co-workers instead of people fighting for the same cause. And they are people risking their lives to fight in a war for their nation. Yet I find the bond between Venti, Paimon, Diluc, and Jean and the Traveler much more believable when they were just trying to deal with a dragon. I think introducing the characters' flaws, motivations, what drives them is also important, and we got that in Mondstadt. I think it was established pretty well. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's there. But I do feel like that's what's lacking in Natlan especially. I'm just using Natlan as an example because it's the most recent one. And it's where I felt the most detached to the characters. Not because they're bad, but because I feel like I don't know them. And I can't be attached to someone I don't know. To this day, I still feel attached to Mondstadt characters, Liyue characters, Sumeru characters, and Fontaine characters, but I don't really feel that way for Natlan. But I think not having dedicated story quests definitely added to that. But yeah, that's it. I know we just went back for the interlude quest, but I already miss Mondstadt a lot again. I am one of those people that hopes we do go back to Mondstadt at the end game, and that's where all of the lore bombs will drop again. I hope Venti gets a second story quest soon. So that's it. That's all I have to say actually. Let me know if you guys are okay with this kind of like chill video where I don't really do any research. I apologize if it's very opinionated, very biased. It's mostly just me yapping my thoughts, but it is a lot faster to make. And if you guys find this enjoyable, I will keep making more because I actually enjoyed that. It's actually very nice to just talk without having to read a script. It's very relaxing. So let me know if you want more chill talks like this. Could be about anything. Give me some ideas. Thank you for listening. Subscribe if you want. If not, that's fine too. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.